Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf Nun, we'll start a few lines in, where the Gemara has said a concept that you cannot try to do something bigger than it's meant to be, and if you do, then you don't get anything. It doesn't work at all. The Gemara is going to have three proofs against that. The Gemara will reject all three proofs. Then the Gemara will go back to the discussion in the Mishnah of somebody who tried to set up an Eruv far from where he is, but he didn't specify the right spot. The Gemara is going to show that if it's possible that you for sure hit part of the spot that he had in mind, and even not all of it, it'll still work. The Gemara will have two versions of that Gemara. Then the Gemara will go back to the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel as to how that Mishnah worked, and the Gemara will bring a proof to Rav and a proof to Shmuel, and the Gemara will reject them both. Okay, so Rabbah has just said a rule. Rabbah's rule is as follows. Anything which you can't do one after the other, you can't do all at once. What does that mean? That means if you have a limited size or amount of some halachic step you're trying to take, and you do bigger than that, you don't get the size you need within the too much that you did. If you do too much, you get nothing. None of it works. We don't say that the part that you needed works and the rest of it is just extra. The way he expressed it was if it can't work one after the other, it can't work all at once, that means that if you are supposed to do a certain size and you can't add to that afterwards, that means you can't do one after the other, and you can't do it all at once, you cannot at once take one larger size than it's meant to be. So Gemara will give a few examples of this. The Gemara is going to try to show that it's not true. You could, let's just simplify the language here, the Gemara is claiming you are able to use a larger size than you're meant to, and what you're meant to will just be chal within the larger size. So the Gemara first acts from the case of Meiser. Meiser is supposed to be 10% of your fruits. Let's say somebody sets aside, he sets off from his fruit, he sets aside 20%. Now Meiser, the Torah said, is 10%, not 20%, so there's extra here. So the Brisa says the following psak. The Brisa says the other 80% that he left, those are fine. You definitely took off Meiser, you took off 10%, you took off 20%. Of that 20%, 10% of the total is Meiser. So therefore, the other 80% is fine. It's fixed. Meiser was taken from it. The problem is, in your 20%, you have 10% Meiser and 10% not Meiser, and that 10% that's not Meiser is not fixed, because you didn't take Meiser from that 10%. You try to make it itself Meiser, and it couldn't become Meiser. So that 10% is tevel. It's forbidden. It wasn't Meisered yet. What ends up happening now is you have 10% Meiser and 10% Isser Tevel mixed together. You don't know what's what, because you know 10% of it became Meiser and you didn't specify what. Therefore, the entire thing is problematic. So the Gemara asks, why should this work? According to Rabbah's rule, you try to take 20% as Meiser, it's too big, nothing should work. Obviously, you see that it's not true. Within the 20% you took, 10% is supposed to be Meiser, 10% is the correct size, so 10% of the 20 becomes Meiser. You see that Rabbah's rule is not correct. So the Gemara says that Meiser is different, because Meiser, we interpret it as every single grain that he took aside, half the grain becomes Meiser. We don't say half of all the grains becomes Meiser. We say each grain is half Meiser and half not Meiser. That means it's applying to every grain. That's what's happening over here. That's why you're allowed to do that with Meiser, specific to Meiser. And that's also why you can't eat it, because each grain is half Meiser and half Tevel. Says, okay, I'll ask you another question. This is from Meiser Behema. Meiser Behema doesn't work that way. You can't make an animal half Meiser and half not Meiser. If you call the way you make Meiser, first of all, what is Meiser Behema? Meiser Behema is the 10th of every animal born this year becomes Meiser. So you give it to the Kohen as a carbon. That means once a year you collect all your lambs and such born this season into a corral, and you let them out one at a time, and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, and whichever one you call 10, that's Meiser. You set that one aside. Then you count again to 10, and again it's Meiser. The 10th one is Meiser. So if you call two of them Meiser, they don't both become Meiser. Only the 10th one is Meiser. The 11th one, which you called Meiser, is not Meiser. So Gemara says, yet if two came out together and you called them both Meiser at once, you said Meiser one time, you said Asiri, and it applies to two, then one of them is Meiser, one of them is not. You don't know which one's which, and therefore you can't eat either of them, and you can't shecht either of them. So you have to bring one as a Meiser and one as a Shlomin. So Gemara says it's the same thing over here. Mice is only one. There's only one 10th animal. Here you had 2 10th animals. How could one of them work? According to Rabbah, it's too much. Too much. Nothing should work. Neither of them should become meiser. So Gemara says meiser payment is different. Meiser payment, we know that if you make a mistake and you mistakenly call the 9th one the 10th, or the 10th one the 9th, or the 11th one the 10th, if you have a 10th mixed in somewhere by accident, it does get a certain amount of a kedusha. It becomes a carbon shlamim. If you do it on purpose, it doesn't work. If you call 10th and then 10th again on purpose, that's useless. But if you do it by accident, it does work. Since it works by accident, it could also work in a case like this where you did 2 at once. Okay, fine. The Gemara's third and final kasha is from Lachmei Taida. The rules when you bring a carbon Taida, that's a carbon to thank Hashem for a special incident. So the carbon comes with 40 loaves of bread. It has to be 40. It can't be more than 40. So if somebody goes and brings 80 loaves of bread, so what should the halacha be? So according to Rabbah, it should be that none of them work. You brought too much. But we see there's a machlokes. Machlokes Chizkiya says 40 out of the 80 become lachmei taida, and Rebbe Yochanan says none of them do. So what's pshat and Chizkiya? According to Rabbah, it shouldn't work. So the Gemara says we already explained this. Their machlokes is in one specific case. They all agree if he said I want all 80 to become lachmei taida, that it doesn't work. That's Rabbah's halacha. You can't make 80 breads into lachmei taida for one carbon. And we all agree that if he says 40 out of the 80 should be, that works. That's fine, because you're only making 40. The machlokes is where he didn't say anything. He just brought 80. So the question is, what was he doing? According to the one that says that it works, according to Chizkiya, he was saying that 40 of these should be the carbon, and the other 40 should be backup. So if something happens to any of the breads, there's backup ones here. But it means it's not Kedushas carbon yet. It's just there to replace if any of them get lost. So you're not trying to make 80 at once, you're only trying to make 40 at once. The other one says, no, it's not what he's trying to do, he was trying to bring 80. And that's why it doesn't work, because bringing 80 at once is no good, like Rabbah's rule explicitly said. The Gemara now goes back to the Mishnah. We refer to the Mishnah where it's seen halacha, somebody is traveling on the road and he sees a tree and he wants to set up his permanent residence, the center of his tchum, to be under that tree. So he says it should be under the tree. Now, a permanent residence, a center of tchum, a makom, is called makom shvisa. That's a 4 amma by 4 amma zone. And we said that it doesn't work because we don't know where his 4 ammas are. It didn't specify, and therefore we don't know where we should measure his 4 ammas from, and therefore it's not worth anything. So Gemara says, Abaye says that if the span under the tree is less than 12 ammas, then we can for sure choose a spot, and we know that his makom shvisa is in there for sure. We'll choose the middle 4 ammas. And the entire thing is less than 12. That middle 4 ammas must contain his makom shvisa. If it was the one all the way on the left, it overlaps with the middle 4 ammas, and if it was the one all the way on the right, it overlaps with the middle of 4 ammas. Therefore, that middle 4 ammas for sure has it in it. So Gemara says, but what do you mean? Which spot are you going to make his makom shvisa? You don't have any one spot that for sure has his makom shvisa. Your middle 4 ammas does, but I don't know where in the 4 ammas. You want to choose the overlap on the left or the overlap all the way on the right. I don't know where. You can't tell me, choose the middle 4 ammas. I don't know which part of the 4 ammas. His makom shvisa may have been all the way on the left and just overlaps a bit on the left, or maybe it overlaps on the right. I don't know where to go. I still don't know where his makom shvisa is. Someone says, no, what Abai was referring to, he wasn't saying if it's less than 12 ammas. He was saying if it's less than 8 ammas. If it's less than 8 ammas, then there's definitely one spot that all the 4 amma zones under this tree have to hit. So that spot will be his makom shvisa. That will count his makom shvisa from right there, because whatever 4 amma area should be his makom shvisa, he didn't specify, it's got to include this overlap spot where all the 4 amma zones overlap. Okay. Now the Gemara goes to the machlokes Rav and Shmuel on the subject, which we saw quoted in the daf yesterday. The machlokes Rav and Shmuel is when we say that if he didn't specify, it's no good. What does that mean? According to Rav, it meant that he doesn't get any makom shvisa, doesn't get anything. He canceled where he's standing, and where he set up under the tree doesn't work because he didn't specify, so it's no good. According to Shmuel, it works. The only thing is, we don't know where under the tree you wanted, and therefore we have to assume l'chumra. So let's say you want to be able to walk north of the tree, we have to assume your makom shvisa is all the way on the southern end, because we have to be machmir and keep you as far to the south as we can. We have to limit your space the entire width of the tree. So Gemara says, so we have a brisa that proves Rav's position, and brisa proves Shmuel's position. So first of all, the brisa proves Rav's position. There's a long brisa. It says as follows: somebody is traveling along the way, and it starts getting dark. Some Shabbos, he sees a tree or a fence, and he says, "My permanent makom shvisa, my center of my tchum should be underneath that tree." Doesn't specify where. Doesn't count. Okay, so far this hasn't helped us. However, says the Brisa further, if he says my place is in that spot, and he points to a specific place, so then that works. That says Makom Shvisa is allowed to make that the center of his Tchum, and he can go 2,000 amos to there and 2,000 amos past it. And this, says the Brisa, is only if that spot was defined. It was a fenced-in area. Either it was a hilltop with sides that are steep, or it was fenced in, or it was a valley, and it was at least 4 amos wide, and not more than a base Sasayim, not more than 5,000 amos. It's got to be a specific definable Rishus. Okay, that's what a Makom Shvisa has to be. Now, this is only if he specified. If he didn't specify where, then it doesn't count. Now, if there are two people, the Brisa continues, and one of them knows a tree, recognizes a tree or fence, one of them does not, so one can have, the one who doesn't can point to one who does, and I'll say that is our Makom Shvisa for each of us. And again, it has to be that he specified the spot. If he didn't specify the spot, then they're not allowed to move. They have no tchum. So you see clearly, like Rav, it says clearly that they have no tchum. They're not allowed to move. If they didn't specify, then they have no tchum, and they can't move. This is not a proof. Shmuel could be very happy with this. Shmuel will say this is talking about where big parts of the area that he is referring to are more than 2,000 amos away from him. Only one part of the area, let's say it's under a tree. Yeah, so only one part of the under the tree is within his 2,000 amos where he's standing right now. He's got to be able to get to it. If his makom is on the other side of the tree, he can't get to it. He's outside of his own tchum, so it's useless. So it's got to be that he specified. In this case, he has to specify, or he gets nothing, because if he didn't specify, then it could be that the place that his Shvisa is too far from him, and it doesn't count. It's useless. He's outside his own tchum, and therefore he's stuck without any tchum. My case, our Mishnah was talking about where it was the whole tree was within his current 2,000 amos of where he's standing right now, and therefore it doesn't matter where it is. Either way, he gets a Makom Shvisa, and then you have to count. You just have to always be machmir where under the tree the Makom Shvisa is. But that's why this is not a right against me. Okay, so now the Gemara says we have a brisa that does prove Shmuel. The brisa says if somebody made a mistake and he made an Eruv in two directions, he made an Eruv to the north of the city, to the south of the city, or he thought that you're allowed to do that, yeah. Or he sent two servants to make an Eruv, one made it northward, one made it southward. So the halacha is he's allowed to use whichever he's allowed to walk anywhere where there's an overlap between the two Eruvin. Yeah, he has to consider both of them to be his tchum, and he's only allowed to walk in a place that's within both tchumin. He's limited to both of them. So, for example, if he set up one tchum 1,000 amos north of the city and one tchum 1,000 amos south of the city, and the city itself is, let's say, 1,000 amos, so there's an overlap between the two tchumin of 1,000 amos. There's 3,000 amos between the tchum centers. There's an overlap of 1,000. He's only allowed to walk in that 1,000 because that's within both tchumin. If, however, there's no overlap, then he can't go anywhere because we don't know which tchum it is, and he has to be machmer for both of them. So you see that Rav is wrong. Rav says that if you have an unspecified tchum, you have multiple options, you can't use any of them. But here we're saying that you could use. As long as you know you're within both of them, you're fine. So Gemara says, you're right, it's a right against Rav, but Rav's a Tana. Rav could argue on this. He's not impressed by this brisa.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.